Hello and welcome to Jackson's Job. Today you will learn how to make short crust pastry, pâte brisée, or as we call it here in Appalachia, pie dough. The ingredients are not excessive and it's not a difficult skill to learn. It will take your pies and pastry up a notch by learning how to make this simple recipe. In a large bowl, we have 1.5 cups of all-purpose or plain flour, that's 225 grams. To that, we add a bit of salt, which is 1/8 teaspoon or 0.625 grams. The salt helps the water distribute through the flour and adds a little flavoring. If you're using salted butter, have the salt. Mix these two together with your hands or the spoon, and then we're going to add the butter using the rub in or rubbing in method. This is where you rub the flour and cubes of cold butter between your fingers until you get the flour coated with the fat. You will need 1/2 cup or 113 grams of cold butter or margarine. You can also use lard, vegetable shortening, or a combination of any of these fats. If you use lard or shortening, you will need to add a bit more water sometimes, as butter and margarine has liquid in their makeup, so keep that in mind. When it comes to short crust pastry, the flour is ideally double the amount of fat. Now because I'm showing you measurements, it's off by a gram, but that's okay. If you are using a scale, go ahead and make that 226 grams of flour to be consistent. As you do the rub-in method, you will end up with a breadcrumb consistency that will range from the size of a grain of sand up to the size of a small pea. That's what we are after, not a uniform appearance, as this will give you a really light and flaky crust. That's why I'm not a fan of the food processor method, but you can try it and see which one you like best. Now we'll add in some liquid. I'm using 1/4 cup of water, which is 60 milliliters. And to that, we're going to add 1 teaspoon or 5 milliliters of white vinegar or lemon juice. The acid in the vinegar or lemon will delay gluten formation and make the pastry more tender and easier to roll out. If you don't have either of these, you can leave it out. It'll just be more prone to cracking and becoming tough as you work the dough. If you are worried, the vinegar smell and flavor bakes completely out, but the lemon juice will leave a hint of taste behind. I actually prefer vinegar as it has a set acidity and it is often lower than lemons as they can vary throughout the season. The more acid, the more tender your crust will be. If you noticed, I'm using a butter knife to mix the liquid into the pastry dough. This helps bring it all together without melting the butter because you're not handling it. Doing this helps ensure you won't end up with a greasy or cracker type consistency in the end. By the way, the liquid for short crust pastries vary, but a good rule of thumb is half the weight of the fat. So that would be about 56 grams. Since there is no US cup measurement for that equivalent, we are rounding up to make it easier for the beginner. Feel free to experiment with the water content as you gain confidence. After you've gotten to the point the knife is no longer bringing the dough together, pour it out onto a clean work surface. In fact, you can do this whole process on your counter, but I found the bowl more comfortable for me as I'm not chasing spilled water across the bench. We are now at the pickup stage. We will be using both our hands and the pastry dough to pick up any crumbs that haven't yet been incorporated. You don't want to knead the dough, but rather gently squeeze, gather, and fold the crumbs into one cohesive unit. Take your time here and go slow. Kneading the dough will only create gluten, so you want to be gentle as possible. Some gluten will develop, but you want it to be minimal. This is where I say a food processor does make your life easier, but it's not enjoyable to clean up after. By the way, this is the first of 4 types of short crust pastry we will be going over in the coming weeks. This particular short crust pastry is perfect for savory dishes such as chicken pot pie and quiche dinners, but it is also a great way to balance out very sweet desserts such as buttermilk pie, which we will hopefully be making in the future. This pastry is the basis for the other 3, so you really want to understand how to make it. The next ones will be enriched with sugar, egg, or both. Since this doesn't have any egg or sugar added, it'll be more finicky to roll out and more flaky. It'll also be less likely to puff up and lose its shape, which is what happens when you use egg. But it will also be more prone to cracking and tearing as you roll it out. Don't let this intimidate you. Just patch it up and move forward. After we learn all the types of short crust pastry, we will then go over how to roll out the dough, create some borders both easy and more complex, and how to blind bake your crust. That way no more soggy bottoms to your pies, but rather a crisp and flaky delight. After all the dough has been combined, you want to give yourself a head start. Pat the dough into a disc no taller than 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. If you have the room, pat it even shorter so it'll be easier to roll out when you are ready to bake those pies and pastries. Sadly, it isn't ready to use. You need to chill the short crust pastry dough. This does 2 things. It lets the glutens relax and ensures a tender crumb. It also allows the butter to chill down and will create those desirable flaky layers. Wrap it up well and let it set for a good 2 hours. I like to use saran wrap. You can use a bag. You can even use a container that has a lid. Overnight is great if you have the time, as it will continue to let the water absorb into the flour and it'll become even more easy to work with in the end. You can leave this pastry in the fridge for about a week or in the freezer for several months. Just bring it to slightly below room temperature when you're ready to use it. I truly hope you enjoyed this recipe. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy baking.